I think one of its underlying differentiators was the ability to move skills and movements to higher levels and to express them in different scenarios with different things that hadn't been done before, like running and lifting weights, or gymnastics and lifting weights, or machines and body weight exercises and lifting weights. So I think he comes at it more from I want to raise the expression level of all these skills with all different combinations to showcase how the athlete can take these high level gymnastic movements, do it really well with a higher level weightlifting movement, do it really well with running, something like that. So I see him trying to elevate everything higher, which inevitably removes some of the intensity, because if the skill is getting elevated, especially if it's a more technical skill, then the intensity comes down.
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. So starting off, I had you on the Fitness Movement before, episode number 33. So people should go back in the archives and listen to that one. We talked about what it takes to become an elite CrossFit athlete. It's a really good conversation. So talked about basically adjustments to someone's mindset, their needs for sleep and nutrition, how that's going to be adjusted, training volume, how that can look different for someone who's increasing their level of, we're looking to increase their competitive level, movement economy. There's a lot in that conversation. So really good stuff that is still super applicable to today. So people should go back and listen to it. Episode 33. Let's like revisit that conversation just for a second, right? What from that conversation, if you remember it all, or just those topics that I just kind of listed off, do you think really has not changed for the competitive athlete in the last several years, or maybe even a decade?
I think all of the pieces outside of training haven't changed. They've probably stayed the same. I think the one that's probably become even more important since we had that talk would be movement economy, movement efficiency. I think that's gotten even more important as people become more competent at the sport. They have more practice of the sport. And something we're going to get into today is, as the testing has shifted a little over the years, I think it's even more important now, the movement efficiency and economy conversation for the athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would say like these are like just cornerstones of someone's like good quality training. Like you can't not really pay attention to your mindset, your sleep, nutrition, like how much you're actually doing and the quality of what you're doing. Like if you're not paying attention to that stuff, like you're not even able to compete at all, like at that level that you're going to want, or like reasonable level. So yeah, it's just as important as it was when we talked about it then, if not more important.
And let me add to that as you and I both have backgrounds in sport, and we both pursued it to high levels. And I think all those are just key principles in all sports. That's what it is. And so now this is a sport, CrossFit. And so the principles that are rooted in all sports have to also be applied here, which also applies to training and periodization and different seasons. So I think now that the sport is becoming each year more legitimate and serious in its own way, coaches and athletes have to be adopting these principles that have been around for, at least 100 years in most sports. So maybe let's be more conservative and say the last like 70 years. But every decade it's becoming more clear that like, yeah, these are the things that high level athletes need to be doing to ensure success.
Yeah, and especially in the last 30 years or so, it's like now you have all the information. Like that's not the issue. Like there is no like like secret in the sense that like you have this new research that no one else has access to or something. Like that's extremely rare if something like that's happening. It's like you have all the information, like all the demo videos are out there, all the technique videos in the world. Like it's not like the early days of CrossFit, like where people like had access to like literally better coaching. Yeah, it's like out there if you want it. So now it's like a matter of constructing it in a way that makes sense for you, which is sort of a good chunk of our life's work.
Yes, that's the fun part.
Yeah. So let's go here. That's all the stuff that hasn't changed in your mind since Bozman has taken over for Dave. What has changed?
Well, the main person behind the testing and the constructing of the tests has changed. So Dave Castro is no longer involved in testing and the designing of the tests. Adrian Bozman is now the head guy. I'm sure he has a team or people that he uses to come up with his thoughts and ideas, but he's, let's say, has the final word on everything, at least to my knowledge. And I think anybody who keeps an eye on the sport and has followed for some time can see that there has been a change in the style and approach to the testing based upon those two men, one stepping away and one stepping in. So there are, which we'll probably talk about, there are characteristics and concepts that are still the same, in my opinion, but just the way they go about testing it and structuring it has changed quite a bit, and especially this year compared to 2021. And then 2022 was a little bit more like in the middle of the two. The games was a little bit more, you could see the bigger difference, but like the quarterfinals were more similar last year to 2021, whereas it was a lot more different this year than it was 2022.
Yeah. If you had to speculate, do you think that's just because Bozman was looking for like a softer transition, like didn't want to make a lot of waves?
I think so. I think he might not have had as much time to like think. Maybe. I mean, I'm speculating. Maybe he didn't have as much time to really sit back and think about what his idea of testing for CrossFit and fitness is, and what that looks like. And I think he had time for the games, but I think for quarterfinals and the open was Dave, and then the quarterfinals was him. So I just think he probably took what Dave made in 2021 and just, okay, these are the small things I'll tweak, because it was very similar to 2021.
At least in my opinion. Again, neither of us are really insiders, so it's all speculation to a degree, and based on like what we're actually seeing that's been spit out the other end. But it seems like he kind of took over the wheel, so to speak, and just kind of like held it for a second, and he's like, okay, we're going this direction. Just sort of slowly started like turning the ship a little bit. And I think both of us have probably recognized stuff where it's like, this to me at least seems like where we're going with the sport, or where Bozman wants to sort of push the envelope a little bit. Again, maybe more things that are similar than different overall. Again, like both of them have been in CrossFit, Dave and Boz, that is, have been it since the beginning. They're both like OGs in CrossFit, and they're like really like the glory days and all that stuff. Like that's stuff that they cherish a lot and hold highly in regard. So it's like that's stuff that they're always going to draw from. Like they're always going to go to back to old benchmark workouts and that sort of thing. But again, so if we pay attention to more of the differences here, what are some things to you that stand out as like, this seems to be a direction that Boz is sort of steering the ship towards in your mind?
Yeah. I think the most obvious, at least in my mind, is Boz isn't trying to kill people. So, yeah. And if I feel like that's even more, I feel like that's even more obvious at the games level though. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Well, let's say each stage down, it gets a little bit more diluted, but yeah, the games would be the most blaring example. And last year it was like, okay, no, he's trying to be smart and strategic with how he's testing people. He's just not trying to see who can handle the most beatings, because that's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're being bluntly honest, it was like, who can be standing the last day? That's the best. And then if you can't, well, then get out of here. And that's what it was. And every test that Boz has designed this far, I definitely see a theme of what's the minimum amount of challenge and loading and volume I can give somebody to separate people in the test, and how do I create challenge through other means than just volume and and difficulty. Like, how can I be more creative? And I think part of that's his gymnastic background, where he's like, let's see higher levels of expression of a movement with fatigue, and I want to see if people can do that really well versus can they handle 300 pull-ups. Like, can you handle doing all this work? It's like, that's a blatant difference, which I think from an athlete perspective, that's really helpful, because you think about now, like the functional volume for training, the difficulty of training, you can view it a little bit differently now. You can be more strategic and less, okay, you need to be able to do 60 muscle ups. It's like, well, not necessarily. You could do 30, but you need to do 30 with 90 GHDs and 120 weighted double unders. And like, how well can you get through 30 then? So that's a really big difference. And I think that has really big implications on how you go about the training process.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I don't imagine us ever seeing a marathon row again with Boz programming.
No. I rode a 5K yesterday in my training, and I was thinking about that. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine having to do a marathon row. But then I thought, it's like, is this necessary as a testing tool? It's like, I just don't know. But again, that's the bias, because his bias was Navy SEAL, that mentality. It's just like, I need to break you and see if you can keep going. So I understand that. I'm just glad now that it's moving in I think a healthier direction, if that's the right word.
Yeah, no, truly. I think that is, I hope that's at least one consideration that Bosman was thinking about is, well, I want, not just for the people who see it, who want to then like mimic it, like there's a trickle down effect from the games community to like the rest of the CrossFit community, like where I've dropped into CrossFit gyms and I'm like, what are we doing here? Like I can barely handle this. And like the average person who walks in, like, what are they going to do? Like they're going to be like crawling out the door sort of thing. So it does have that trickle down effect where it's like, if it's more balanced at the top, hopefully it's more balanced at the everyday affiliate. However, it's also like very apparent that like a lot of the games athletes, especially from like the early days who like didn't have super great organization to their training or like structured off seasons, things like that, like they're pretty beat up. So hopefully it extends the longevity of the people who are competitors in the sport, both like when they're in the sport, but then also having like better like quality of life health when they get out of it too as well. Like hopefully I think he does think about like those big picture items like that.
Yes, I'm getting that vibe so far, and that makes me happy, because there's far more competitors who got spit out than there are those that are doing, like what Noel Olson's doing and competing for his 10th year. Like, you can count on one hand how many are at that, who've had that longevity. And that's not good. I think, if you want the sport to thrive and you want to have a long-term athlete developmental model, it has to be with the intention that you can get to the peak and be there for 5-6 years, something like that. It's not like 1 year. I don't think that's a good timeline or ending stage for an athlete in a sport.
Yeah, it is like people who've worked with higher level competitors. It's like, and you've worked like that with the highest, like you've worked with games athletes, like you also see what those people have to do if they want to compete at that level. And I would much rather, like if I just care about someone as a person, I don't even care about them as an athlete. Like I would rather have them preparing for CrossFit Games in 2025 than 2015.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of, in my words, like maybe a shift in volume. That's not just like a war of attrition anymore. That it's maybe a push towards maybe execution in certain workouts than just like, again, be able to handle it. Are there other shifts that you've seen?
Yeah, another one would be the spreading out of the volume. So there's a lot more movements involved. Like there was like a concentrated dose on one movement, like 180 pistols, 180 GHG sit-ups. But that's a lot of one thing. Whereas you look at the quarterfinals, which you competed in, so you have some great firsthand experience and knowledge of the quarterfinals from this year. There were a lot of movements and the volume was spread across many things. So he's looking at, he's testing a lot of different things and combining them. And so I think that's interesting because that's very different than a lot of the tests that Dave created and used. So that alone shifts how now you're thinking about training. It's like, okay, well, you don't necessarily have to be able to do 180 GHG sit-ups and with other pieces, but you need to be able to do 80 GHG sit-ups with also handstand walking and pistols or something like that. Like you need to be able to integrate things more effectively and handle the non-complementary and the interference effect that movements will have on each other. So I like that because then that's going to ask the coach and the athlete to be more strategic and creative with how they think about progressions and training and the combinations of things. So that's a fun aspect, as you know, of the design process. And so I like that it forces us to think a little differently about training.
Yeah. Yeah. In my mind, it's just like, I don't think Bozman would say it this way, but it's just like more novel stuff, at least right now. And I think it's going to get harder and harder the longer you go into the sport to like come up with like new stuff that like people haven't done before. But clearly like games last year, even like open and quarterfinals this year, just like different standards, different variations of stuff, like different combinations, just a lot of variety. More so than like you were saying, like Dave had. Like Dave, it was like, hey, here's a couplet and you're going to have to handle 150 of each of these movements if you want to get a top score in the open. Like here's overhead squats and chest to bar until you rip your hands and then keep going for another 5 minutes sort of thing. Which again, just from the health of the community, I think it's a cool thing to see, but then also you get to be more creative in how you have to, but then you also get to be more creative in how you write designs and how the combinations that you give and things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. On that note, because you brought up something, you said you spoke about novelty. I would add though, the underlying characteristics of tests are still very similar. What I mean by that is you look at the semifinal tests, you have a long extended aerobic capacity test, you have a higher skill test, you have a more traditional CrossFit test in the Linda, you have a max contraction type test with some great front end fatigue and strategy. You have a power test, which is this event 5. You have an extended chipper that has a flare for Boz, which is 6, and then you have a short sprint event, which is 7. So those are like the characteristics that have been in all the regionals from 12, 13. I'd have to look at the 2011, 2012, but I'm pretty sure it's been a very similar theme over the last 8-9 years of regionals and semis now, where those are characteristics that they test for at this stage. And those characteristics, a lot of them go to the games as well. There's something longer, there's some power events, there's mixed skill events, there's traditional CrossFit style events, there's sprint events. So as a coach, those ideas are still there, which then makes it easier for you to think about the training process because people need to be capable in these characteristics of tests. Now, what goes inside of it is where the novelty will come in, because now you're like, oh, we're going to do these movements. Oh, we're going to add in a ruck here. Oh, we're going to add in a pirouette, whatever that will look like. So the novelty can sit inside of the characteristic that they're testing for. It's not like, the first event was a half marathon run. It's like, oh, okay, now we got to do, it's like, they kind of stick to the, 20 to 40 minute range, and they're going to add in some other implement, that's kind of where they sit with that idea. So that's, I guess that would be one thing that complements the novelty is there is similar characteristics that have stayed around for quite some time still.
Yeah.
At least that's how I see it.
No, I agree. I mean, like we said, I think there's more that's similar than is different. It's just that when you're staring into the same like puddle long enough, it's like you start to see what's going on.
Yes, ideally.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
All right. So it seems like Bozman is pushing the gymnastic skills up. Like obviously with Dave, it was like you had to be sort of elite level strong to be elite level CrossFit competitor. I don't want to say fit because that could be kind of subjective, but to be like the best in CrossFit, you also had to be like right there, like very close. Maybe not like, so strong that you're someone who can't sustain the volume, and like we were saying, but someone who, considering you can handle the volume, is incredibly strong relative to that. Where the lot of the gymnastics stuff, it was like, this is your highest level is a muscle up, and then it's just we're gonna keep doing them until you fall apart. Whereas now there's maybe a few ways that Boz is exploring. How can we push the gymnastics without, again, just kind of raising the ceiling on how many reps you're doing necessarily. So there seems to be like some stuff he's doing with, like even like semifinals, like there was like a complex on the rings or something a little bit different, but it seems like a lot of the gymnastic stuff is like on the hands, like hand balancing stuff that might be a little bit different. Like there's pirouettes. There was a handstand hold in the group or the age group semifinal. And Dave had done that before too, but it just seems like Bozman's pushing that a little bit. Is there anything you want to comment on either of those fronts, the gymnastic side of stuff?
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I would add, I think Boz is approaching it from the lens that I think CrossFit's, one of its underlying differentiators was the ability to move skills and movements to higher levels and to express them in different scenarios with different things that hadn't been done before, like running and lifting weights, or gymnastics and lifting weights, or machines and body weight exercises and lifting weights. So I think he comes at it more from I want to raise the expression level of all these skills with all different combinations to showcase how the athlete can take these high level gymnastic movements, do it really well with a higher level weightlifting movement, do it really well with running, something like that. So I see him trying to elevate everything higher, which inevitably removes some of the intensity, because if the skill is getting elevated, especially if it's a more technical skill, then the intensity comes down. So if you're doing just muscle ups and thrusters, then intensity will stay pretty high. But if you're doing a, ring, pull over into a dip, or an L-sit, strict muscle up into handstand walking into thruster, like the intensity comes down. So the complexity goes up, but it's trying to showcase, like, can you do these things and can you do them at a high rate? So I definitely can see him trying to force all the athletes to show greater ability with these higher level, especially on the hands. Like you mentioned, there's a lot more handstand, hand balancing requirements, free handstand holding, pirouettes. And then he's also almost making the capacity pieces a lot less complex. So he's forcing people to show real capacity, like in the open. I mean, shuttle run and burpee pull-ups, like that's so simple. And I did it, and it's like it could get really greasy. Like you could really lean into it if you had the ability and you wanted to push, whereas if you're doing pistol, deadlift, and handstand walk, it's like the ability to really express, like, you still will express capacity, but there's more constraints that are going to limit you. It's just simple. So, and same with like this last event for the semis, I was thinking about that. Like that's a very simple test that there isn't a lot of bottlenecks. Like it's just like, you just got to go for it. And same with event 5. There's nothing worse than having to run really fast for 3 minutes. That's really painful. So I love that he's simple in one area, and then he's trying to build complexity in another area. I think that's a nice polarity in the testing body.
Do you think shuttle runs are going to be the double under equivalent in the open and maybe quarterfinals going forward, in the sense that like double unders have shown up every year? we're going to see like shuttle runs like in almost every phase of the early season because he wants people to run when they are doing a test of fitness?
I would hope so, because if you're going to test running as much as you do at the games level, and now at the semifinal level, which I was really glad to see there was quite a bit of running, then you need to be testing for that leading into it, you know? I mean, even to be honest, you can make an argument that if you're going to test swimming at the games, then you probably need to do swimming at the semifinals. So yeah, I would assume the shuttle run is going to make a more consistent presence at the quarterfinal level, and maybe also the open. So it is different. I mean, it's still running. Like if you're a good runner, you'll do well at it.
That was going to be my follow up is like, how do you think about developing someone's running capacity if they're like the crux of their season is like a quarterfinals?
That's a good question. Well, I think what I mentioned before you said that was if somebody's good at running, they'll be good at shuttle runs. Yeah. So if I make them better at running in general, and then as we get closer, I add in the practice of that, they'll be good to go. They're not doing, you know, shuttle run progressions through the summertime. They're learning to run for 60 minutes unencumbered and keeping their heart rate, you know, low and stable, and it's very smooth, and they can recover fast from it. So I'm going to build their ability to run, and then I'm going to layer in the skill of shuttle running. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think, like if I was going to think about developing somebody's rowing, like you're not just going to row in Metcons. Like,
no,
you're probably gonna do like some easy 5Ks in the off season and slowly like ramp up the intensity of that, and you know, go through some concerted row progressions where like you're actually focused on getting better at rowing, and then you'll start to mix it in. And not that it has to be like that cut and dry, but I think with something like running, it's like, do you just want to be doing shuttle runs the entire year? Yeah, just because you're an open level athlete. So yeah, probably not. Yeah. You should be doing them at least some of the time.
100%. Well, for me and how I think of all of this, which that's an interesting conversation in and of itself. Like, what's the underlying philosophy that guides your decision making for the sport? Because this sport is so, it's not like track and field. It's like, oh yeah, they do the 400. Then I know what the training philosophy is for that. Whereas this is so chaotic and different. It's like, I think a lot of people have different approaches to it. But for myself, skill development is a huge anchor to how I think about the sport. And I think of all movements as a skill that has to move through the developmental process to then put it to this high level. So the running is the same thing. You think of the shuttle run. Well, what is shuttle run? Well, it's running. Okay, if it's running, then how do we move running through that process to get it to a place where it's really elite inside the context of the sport? So that's how I think of all these movements, even these new ones that he's coming out with now. You know, like, I need to elevate the skill through the model to get it to a place where they can do it with fatigue and all these other variables.
Yeah. It also seems like, at least, again, this is my interpretation, it seems like Bozman is like, this is what you think this thing is for testing, and I'm going to push it in like a different direction. Like, oh, you think this is a double under rope? Well, it's a jump rope, and you can do a lot of different stuff with it. I think very easily we could see that with something like a shuttle run. It's like, oh, you think this is like an endurance tool, and he puts it in as like a, 8 lengths for time, as like it's, into something else or whatever, right? Where it's like a sprint now, and it's like you have to be, it's really like a tool to like show that you can master your own body weight manipulation or something. So like, I think, like you're saying, like in order to have someone be able to express on all the different tests that they need to, then you need to be like a master of that particular movement. And it's like the only way you can do that is if you like understand how to do it in like a lot of different ways. And that's not gonna be something that's just like pure capacity based.
Yeah, you need to be able to do freestanding handstand push-ups. You need to be able to hold in a box. You need to be able to do circles, pirouettes. You need to go over a ramp. You need to go over parallel bars. It's like, I think that was a perfect piece you just mentioned there, that this rope's not just for double unders. There's many things you can do. This, being inverted is not just for handstand push-ups. There's many things you can do. The rings aren't just for muscle ups. There's many things you can do. So I think that's I would assume that is how Boz is thinking about all these movements. He's like, yeah, you've just thought it was for this for the last 7 years. Well, actually, no, there's a lot more to it.
Do you have a topic that you'd like to request as a future show, or just a question about training? Reach out to me. My email is ben@zorfitness.com, or you can DM me on Instagram @zorfitness. Lastly, head over to zorfitness.com if you want to browse all of our previous shows with in-depth show notes, as well as educational content for all things training. I'm curious about how you think about an athlete who is not at the top of the sport yet, but they're improving, and like that's their goal is, let's just say we have someone, make it more concrete, has someone, their goal is to make it to a semifinal, but they haven't made it there yet, right? They're a quarterfinals level athlete. They're fairly close, but it's like kind of up in the air whether they're going to make it in the next year or the next 3 years, whatever. And then there's going to be like some movements that are probably very unlikely to see, like air runner, like a sandbag. Not that they couldn't program that in quarterfinals, but like there's certain movements that are just much less likely to see in a quarterfinals, just because of the difficulty of it, like the logistics of it to program. Is that something that you think about, like giving them select doses of that? Do you say, well, you kind of need to be able to really understand how to perform at your best in all the quarterfinals movements? Where do like the sort of the next step up, the next like tier of movements, where does that come in?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing I thought of was, how close are they to qualifying? And of course, what limited them from qualifying? I use that a lot to leverage where I need to go forward. Because if they came, like for you were inside the top 60, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, you got a penalty and it bumped you out.
Correct.
And if you didn't have the penalty, you would have stayed in. It happened to one of my guys too in the East. So I could use him as an example. Same with you.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you both have everything you need right now to qualify. You just got the bad luck of the draw where they saw one of your videos and they thought that wasn't a good rep. And so what's the learning? Okay, have to be really deliberate with reps, especially squatting. I don't know where you got the penalty. Maybe it was the squats.
Yeah.
Yep, that was my guy too.
What was it? Extension?
Yeah.
Same. It seemed to be their pet thing this year.
They throw the hook out and they just want to see. They're just trying to bait you. Like, come on, do it. Test me. It's frustrating. But hey, you know what? You play the game. You got to play by the rules. So it is what it is. So having said that, you guys have what you need to make it. So as a coach, now I think, okay, then the path we're on the right path. We need to keep doing what we're doing. That means that the pieces that have been lagging or we've been working more diligently on, we will continue to build and develop. And now we'll probably integrate some of these new movements, these new demands that we're seeing in the testing body, while keeping a pulse on everything that we have been working on. So I'm not changing course a lot with that particular athlete of mine. It's like we're doing the same things and we're building the same things we need. And now we're just practicing these new things that we're seeing, because there's a good chance you might have to do them in a fatigue setting. You might have to do pirouettes next year in the quarterfinals. You might have to do a seated legless row climb. So we need to make sure we can do those things. But from a general preparatory perspective, like you have what you need already. So let's just keep elevating the ability level. Yeah. That's a little vague, but I hope that gives some idea. Let me throw you a bone though. Let's say they're like 100th or 120th and we got to get to 60. Now that's a little different, because now I'm thinking, okay, what were the specific limiters in those events for you that didn't allow you to get to 60th? And so those might be grip endurance, overall volume tolerance, their battery with lifting under fatigue with event That was event 3, correct? Or is that 4?
Clean and jerk? 3.
Yeah, was that 3? Maybe that was tough for them. Maybe their maximum's not high enough to allow them to move 275 fast for 185 for the females.
Right.
So in those circumstances, then I'm taking the specific characteristic and working on that while still doing the other things we need to do. So that would be, a little bit of a difference between the two.
Well, that makes sense. Let me give you a very specific example. Like, say you have an athlete, say they qualified for a semifinal, and they're, in the middle of the heat there, right? At what point are you like, you need to go out and buy a membership to your local Y so you can swim on Thursdays? Like something like that, where you're like, hey, if you do make it to the next stage, like if we take 6 weeks before we know you've qualified for the games, we're going to try to get you ready for like the movements that you're going to see. Cause like we said, like we're probably not going to see swimming at a semifinal. Then it's like, at what point do you say like, there's this very specific movement that like you're probably going to need, but up to this point, you haven't needed it at all. I'm not sure how often that happens, but like, say that is the case. Like when do you think that might be appropriate to say like, hey, we should probably start throwing in some swimming or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. If they have a legitimate chance, or let's say they're in the middle of they're like in the top 30, then the swimming addition, and it makes sense, could be really great, because there could be a lot of local adaptations that are happening through just the swimming practice. Not that it needs to be intense, but if you're getting better at swimming, you're becoming more efficient, there could be some great muscle endurance carry over to the upper body that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. You have to be careful though, because I've done this before where I give people swimming and they're not good at it and they're not efficient, and it just tires them so much that the next 2 days of training are horrible because they're just so fatigued. So you got to kind of know like where they sit. But yeah, I would probably say if they're starting to get into the top half of the field, then we're probably starting to slowly implement it a bit more. But yeah, it'd be one of those skills where it's before then, you're better off maybe running more, you're better off spending that extra hour a week running, because running's more valuable even at the highest level. Swimming's one event, it's not 3 events. Running is 4 or 5 different events with different speeds and different scenarios. So running arguably will always be a more valuable use of time for a competitor.
Yeah. No, I mean, what I'm kind of hearing is like, if it's reasonable that the person, like, I would not be surprised if this person makes it to the next stage, then it's like, if there are specific things, it's like, okay, give them touches of those specific things so that they're not completely blind, but like there's a reason you didn't make it to the next stage yet. We have to make sure like that stuff's taken care of.
100%.
So like, hey, maybe we do give you some of this other stuff, but let's keep it in a sandbox and not let it go crazy.
You did mention about sandbags and the runner, stuff like that. I try to, and you probably do this too, because I see this in your own training, I try to make sure there's great variation in all the different patterns and ways of challenging the patterns I'm giving people in their training. So even if they're not at the semifinal level yet, I'm still going to give them lots of movements or variations that you would see at semifinals, because it's good for variety in the pattern to help increase the expression and ability of the pattern. Like we talked about, it's not just chest to bar, it's all different pulling variations. And that's good too from a health perspective, because you're changing the way the joint is being challenged, so you're not overloading one pattern too much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, are you not going to give like an open level athlete like any air bike work?
Yeah.
It's like, wow. I mean, it's a great tool. Might as well use the tool.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, that's how I feel about a lot of the other stuff that like you typically see in like CrossFit gyms that like people have available for them to do in their training. It's like, oh, you got sandbags? Cool. You got I don't know.
A yoke?
Like, yeah, a yoke, like all that kind of like, oh, you have this tool available to you. Like, why wouldn't we use it? Like, you keep things fresh, keep it fun. Like, and it'll also help you like learn and just be a better athlete.
100%.
Are there movements that you find yourself most frequently writing for athletes that have not been tested, they're unlikely to be tested, that you find yourself frequently writing in people's designs? I'm going to see if I can get 2 of them here from what I've seen out of you. Turkish get-ups, Bulgarian split squats, like bicep curls, isometrics, things that, like, again, you're unlikely to see. I mean, you could, right? But relatively unlikely. What are some things that, like, you find yourself using a lot?
Yeah, Turkish get-ups a lot, especially now for a lot of people off-season train. I think it's such an amazing movement. And I mean, who knows? Boz could make people do it, and that'd be great. I always send this, like, when I have clients who complain a little bit about Turkish get-ups, or it's like, oh, I gotta do a 10-minute AMRAP, and I'm like, watch this video of Marcus doing 30 with a 32 kg kettlebell in like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. And I go, until you can do that, you don't get to complain at all, because that guy was a games athlete multi-year. So I think that's a great movement. I definitely use that a lot. L-sit pull-ups, that could be used though. What else do I give? I don't know.
Is that just because it makes someone stay more vertical? Why L-sit pull-ups?
Well, it can definitely expose a lack of shoulder flexion and the ability to maintain an extended thoracic spine with a flexed hip. Because if that lumbar has to be, let's say, pretty neutral, it can be very hard for people to get into like a really beautiful L position. So they have to compensate. They got to lean back a little bit more, or they have to bend the knee a little bit. So I think it exposes quite a bit. It also challenges that pattern a lot more. And it's one of those, let's say, like higher level variations of a pull-up. An L-sit is probably, well, that would get tested eventually, and it has kind of been tested. I give a lot of L-sits because I think if you're good at L-sits, I mean, it fixes so many things. I'm sure you would agree with me on that. So I love L-sits and helping people try to become a lot more competent there. But I don't know. I don't know if I really have a lot of sled work. I like sandbag. I use a lot of sandbags. I like that for bending. But they do use sandbags, so it's not like it's. But I think I've been using sandbags longer than they've probably used them. I've been using them for quite a while, but I probably use them more now. But yeah, I'm not that. I guess I'm pretty vanilla. I'm not that creative.
Well, let's go back.
Well, how about you? I'm curious if you. Let me ask you the same question.
So, if there's like something that like a pattern or like a movement that like someone just has a really hard time getting into without like compensations, that we kind of have to use a different tool to be able to like attack that thing, then I'll give that. Like, for example, if someone like gets away from their quads when they're squatting all the time, then it's like, okay, let's give you a variation where if I teach you how to do it correctly, you can at least force yourself into it. And like, even if as you get fatigued, it kind of doesn't really break down. Like, so something like a Bulgarian split squat. I give quite a bit of hamstring work. Where
glute hand raises.
Yeah, like glute hand raises.
Nordic curls.
Yeah. Yep. Even just like banded hamstring curls. Just for like knee health. And I feel like a lot of times the hamstrings don't get a lot of time under tension. Like, even if you're doing bending patterns and like touch to go deadlifts or something, it's like someone's racing it, they're minimizing the time on the eccentric. You still get the hamstring, but it's not the same as if you're doing like something that's a little bit more focused. Glute bridges quite a bit, just because again, I don't think you could probably get away with like maybe some like sled work or something if you get you want to work the glute in like a more of like a horizontal, like traveling, like kind of like the end range motion.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff like strict pull-ups, ring dips, which like I think maybe it's technically been tested, but it's like not really comes to mind a lot. But like that's certainly a great developmental tool that will have awesome carryover to a lot of their stuff. Yeah, I mean, probably it's like categories, like I said, like there's stuff that is very, like for some reason they have a conversation that like we're trying to avoid that thing, trying to keep them generally healthy, or just like build like general capacity in a joint for like strength, like something that is more just like an accessory that's like single joint, like a bicep curl or something, right? Where it's like, I just want to tax this specific thing, and that's a great way to do it. But it's not a great measure of like fitness, and it's not like something that's probably ever going to be tested, but it's a good tool to build.
Yeah.
So are the movements like, I don't know, handstand course, obstacle course, zigzag sprint? I don't know. I could probably go like, like there's all this stuff that is tested at like the high level that often never gets tested earlier on. Like, when have we ever seen a 3-minute open workout?
Yeah.
Like that's super high power stuff. I mean, we've seen that now at quarterfinals, but is there stuff from Bozman that you see kind of trickling down? It's like, hey, this is some of the stuff we saw at the games, and it's probably coming down to maybe certainly semifinals, but probably quarterfinals.
It's a good question. One thing I was thinking of that I don't think it's tested a lot, and in the context I'm going to mention, is jumping, like higher jumping.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets tested. I don't think jumping gets tested much. Big jump rope, yeah, it's a jump, but it's different than you have to jump onto a high box, or you have to do a lot of reps onto a 40-inch box, or a broad jump. I think that might be one. That's something I definitely do a lot more of in the off season, is a lot of jumping for strength expression. That's not axial loading.
Yeah. I'll add that to my list of things that aren't tested, is like plyometrics.
Yeah. Real plyometrics.
Yeah. Not just like box jumps. Although
Granted,
I do use them quite a bit too, though.
I was going to say, granted, based on the sport and the goal of the sport, or at least in my opinion, you wouldn't want to express the plyometrics how a track athlete would, because you would be exerting too much energy with each rep, and it'd fatigue you too much, because you're not trying to produce power, you're trying to extend your power out. So you're doing plyometrics, but you're trying to make it a much more repeatable activity. But the irony is, if people aren't doing that, then when they try to do it, they have to use a lot of energy because it's very demanding, and so they do fatigue fast. So
in other words, you see more box jump overs, like clear box jump overs, like a broad jump or something that's like between two lines. Like you see that sort of stuff potentially trickling down.
Yeah. Or high box jumps. 40 inches for a guy. Those are tough. Those are high. I'll use those, I'll give people like 5 rounds, 5 box jumps to 40 inches for a guy, 5 power cleans at 245 in singles. It's like a battery type test, how I classify it. And that's a really nice way of teaching people how to, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax. So, but I also like it for like priming the nervous system before lifting. So I give them a lot of seated box jumps, hurdle jumps, single leg jumps, broad jumps, burpee vertical jump, and reach. So just to like get their nervous system going, so that then when they go squat or pull, they're like, they're fired up.
Maybe we'll see in next year's quarterfinals, like burpees still like a 24-inch target.
Yeah. Jeez,
I was thinking like the challenge of like jumping to like a 40-inch box or something like that is that most people are going to have to stack 220s on top of each other, and that can get sketchy.
Yeah.
But so it's like most people have the 20 by 24 by 30. So like he's obviously used the 30s quite a bit already for the guys. But then it's like, what could you do besides that? It's like, okay, you could do a cleared one, but you got to make sure it's a certain width for every single person. So that's the same. It's a really simple way to do that. It's just go on a wall somewhere.
Yeah. I think if they got more technical with the jumping, or more fancy, those are polar opposite words, but using them the same, it would probably be where they could control it more. So it would have to be at the games of the semis,
right,
where they made like a special 40-inch box for the semis. It would be hard in the quarterfinals. But the clearing of the box could be a good tool. But to your point, you'd have to make sure it was the same dimensions. But you did ask a question. I want to make sure I hit on it. you were asking around what movements from the games would trickle down to quarterfinals, open possibly. And well, I mean, the wall facing handstand push-ups have trickled down, which those I remember doing those in 2015. So they've been around, they just haven't been tested.
Yeah.
Because it's always been the strict or the kipping. That's it. There's nothing else. So I see that, which that's trickled down. The legless rope climb from seated. I mean, that was supposed to be at the games. What else? Kettlebells. I mean, well, they've used the kettlebells for the masters, but they haven't used them for the individuals, which is interesting. But I like the kettlebells, so I'd be interested to see if they'll have people. They might be hard though at like a quarterfinal level to have standardized kettlebells, because you could get some like janky one that doesn't have a weight on it, but you say it's 60 or 70 pounds, but it's really 60. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's quite a bit you could do with kettlebells that even if it was the exact same movement, like it's just a clean and jerk, it's like, okay, but it's entirely different when it's a kettlebell.
Yeah, very different.
So let's say we have someone who's like a semifinals bubble level athlete. Okay. And let's just say that they're not really out of bounds on anything. Like if we look at their quarterfinal scores, it was like, they got like 200 points on each workout or something, right? That's very rare, but let's just say that happened. Kind of two ends of this, well, maybe not two ends of the spectrum, but like two different qualities. Like how much do you think you need to continue to work on like top end strength development relative to something like battery, which is like repeatability of like moderately heavy efforts, like event 3 from this year, and then continue to work on like maybe not straight engine work, but like again, like they were like repeated open 15.5. It was like rowing and thrusters, like very simple high power output, like basically maxing out energy systems versus like stuff that's more bottleneck.
Good question. 200 across the board. Well, you haven't really seen all the lifting thus far has been under fatigue. The open, the thruster, clean and jerk with burpees, and now the snatch with the running and a very tight time window. And even at the games, who knows? It could be, you run 5 miles, you bike 5 miles, and you have to do a max clean and jerk or something like that. So I'm seeing this, which tying back to what we talked about earlier around the elevating of all skills to higher levels of expression, lifting load under fatigue would be that. One of my biases is heavily with getting people a lot more capable and comfortable with battery work and feeling really good under their ceiling. And I make a strong argument that as you get better at that, your ceiling can go up slowly, not exponentially. You probably need very specific progressions and intention to really move the needle, like 10, 20, 30 pounds in your lifts. But if it's like 5, 10 pounds over 8, 9 months, that's pretty good in my opinion. Yeah. While underneath that, you're getting better and better. So with each of my clients, I'm trying to pick 2 or 3 real characteristics or movements or tests that if those are going up, then I'm pretty confident that their overall fitness is rising based upon the sport they're playing in. So maybe with that guy, it is a snatch. Like if his snatch is going up, then we're on the right track. Or if maybe it's a 5K row for that person, where it's like, okay, if this is going up, then I'm fairly confident these other pieces are going to be rising as well. So it's really hard, as you can get from me talking thus far. It's hard. It's hard with a really generic, like they came 200th across. It's like, well, then they probably just need another year of training.
Yeah.
That would be my very simple response to.
So is it as simple as like you're going to continue to work some like max strength, like developmental work, like run basic progressions like you would for pretty much anybody in like an off season, and then like also give them some battery work, and as you get closer to season, give them more of it?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
Would you push back on that in any way?
It would just depend. It always depends. It depends. Where are their top numbers? Like, can they clean and jerk 345? Can they snatch 275 as a guy? If they can, then great. I don't need to move those. Like, I need you to be really good at 265 snatch or 245 snatch, or I need you to be really good at 315. Right. Like, that's where my head goes, because if I'm building those characteristics, usually the overall fitness is rising given what the sport tests for. That's kind of how I think about it. So, I do anchor it on, like, are you strong enough to compete? Because if you're not, then we need to build that. But again, is that more of a limiter for them than capacity and potential bottlenecks that they are weak at? Or do they just not have great capacity in general? So that's why context is so helpful. And you know this as a coach. It's like, I have a program, compete program. It's fun, but it's challenging because you have to make big assumptions on what are the limitations people have. Whereas when it's one-to-one, I can clearly pull out, like, these are the limitations. So these are what we're going to prioritize.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer when it's like, we don't have someone in front of us, and it's so easy to answer usually when someone's actually there in front of you. It's like, well, this is what you need. Like, like, you're incredibly strong. We just need to push up some of these other numbers and like have you work under your ceiling, or it's like, your capacity is great. It's just that you're not strong enough. Like, usually the answer is pretty simple when you got someone sitting down in front of you.
Yes. Well, and I think that's a good lesson or takeaway for anyone is you want to gather as much data and insight as you can on anyone that you're working with before you start making decisions and plans for what you need to do in training. Because I think early on, because I've done this, you have somebody that you want to work with or a particular avatar, and you already start thinking, well, we need to do all these things. Like, well, if you don't have any data on them or know what they've done, then you're guessing. You have no basis for your decision-making process. So you gather as much information as you can, as much results as you can, as much subjective feedback as you can. And then it makes it really easy to then make a really sound decision on, these are the things we're going to prioritize and work on. So I think that's a good takeaway. And also why, working one-on-one with people's, I think, a lot easier than training a group or designing for a group. It's a little bit harder, and it's not right or wrong. It's just the nature of it, because you just have less data and insights to work with. So that would be my thought on that.
Are you saying that you block off time to test at the beginning?
That's a good question. I used to say I could count on, like, both my hands how many people I've ever worked with who I've given them legit testing up front. Because most often when people come to you, they've probably been following some program that was way over programmed to start with, and it was too much for them and they couldn't handle it. Now they're hurt, they have an injury, they're burnt out, they want to feel good, they want to feel healthy. And so the last thing you do is you put them through testing, because their body and nervous system's not in a place to actually express it. So I give them, and this is something I talked a lot of my mentees about, is, all training is testing, in a sense, where you're getting insights from all the training. Could you actually do that? Could you execute that effectively? Did you do all the sets I wanted? Even if I give them a few weeks of just good sound training, I'm still pulling a lot of insights from that on where they're at and figuring out what we need to do moving forward. So it's more rare that I'm giving people real structured testing up front. I do give them things, a lot of it, but a lot of it's like strength tests that I want. I want to see a lot of the bench press, pull up, tough snatch, power clean battery, split squat, AMRAP muscle up set, handstand push up tests, some real simple cyclical tests.
Yeah.
So there's no thrusts or burpees.
Yeah, like stuff that you have a lot of like comparison data on.
A lot, yes, exactly. Those are the very simple ones that, if you give me your 5-minute strict handstand push-up test and a 5-minute strict pull-up test with pronated grip, I can pull a lot of insights from those two scores. I can tell you right away, you're 2 standard deviations away from where you want to be. So that's a lot of work.
So let's answer part 2 of that question. How much do you think someone, again, that maybe the avatar that we gave before, just like straight engine capacity work like for like a CrossFit Metcon?
Oh yeah, that's a good question, because I've been thinking a lot on this recently, and I'm kind of slowly changing how I'm thinking about endurance and capacity work for the sport. But maybe next time we talk, I can give you more articulate thoughts on that, because I'm still working through it. I definitely think of capacity with machines and running. I think running's greatly undervalued with all the people in this sport. Like, if you're really good at running, meaning you can run well, you can run long, you can do running with other things, and it's not like the most painful thing you ever do. Because for a lot of people, you do burpees and deadlifts and running, and it's like so painful, because running with anything can be really painful. But if you have the fitness built to where you can run and be okay, I can go a long ways in a lot of things. So all of those cyclical modalities, if those need to be at a competitive level, in my opinion. So if those are lagging, then they probably need some specific attention. And then once they get to a certain point, then you have to be good at rowing after doing 20 minutes of really hard work. It doesn't matter if you can just row a 6:42K. So for you probably don't need as much specific isolated aerobic volume building with the machines. You probably need it more integrated, because you have adequate capacity given the ability level you're at. Unless, your 5K row is like 22 minutes, then it'd be like, well, that's pretty bad. But if you're, in the mid 17s, great. Like, you're in a good spot. You can bike 200, 190 cals in 10 minutes. You're in a good spot. Then now I need to help you learn like how to use this with other pieces. That becomes way more important. So that's how I think about that bucket.
Would you have thought about that the same way when Dave was programming? So for example, like we saw things like a 1K row time trial at like stage 1 of the 2020 games. Basically like relatively early on in the season, where there's still like a large pool of athletes, like a single modality test or something that is like very simple. And it's like, if you don't have the capacity in this one thing, you are not going. Like last year's quarterfinals, maybe that was 2 years ago, 120 cal or 120 wall ball, 120 cal row. Like I was nowhere close to where I needed to be. And part of it, I mean, this isn't just this, but like I'm a shorter athlete. So it's like, should I always be working on my rowing because I'm shorter, just in case a row time trial comes out?
No. But that's a great example, because that event is testing how good you are at rowing after you've accumulated that much fatigue. And that's so different than just doing like repeats. Like that's doing 10 minutes of easy work, and then now you need to do 5 minutes of hard rowing, or 10 minutes of, easy biking into 5 minutes of hard biking. So that's very different than just doing these isolated intervals. So that's a perfect example of, you need to have capacity under the presence of accumulated fatigue on these machines, with running, with everything. So that would be, you not doing well in that event. I would go, okay, then you need to improve your ability to put out power on this machine after you've accumulated quite a bit of fatigue. Like you need to be able to hold, maybe like 1,300, 1,400 for 5-6 minutes after you've done some tough work for 5 to 6 minutes, or 4 to 5 minutes. So that's different. The 1K row, that's a good example. I think, to be honest, that might have been the first time they've done a very isolated singular test like that, though. Isolated 5K for time run, or a 10-minute max bike. Even though last year at the games, they did 5-minute max bike cals for the Masters, which was interesting. So Now, ideally, not to go on a tangent here or pivot away from what you're asking. Ideally, the training as a whole is elevating all these things where if the 1K came up, you had the ability to be competitive there. Because I had a female athlete compete in 2020 at the first stage of the games, and she had to do that. And she's a good rower, so she didn't need like ongoing specific rowing progressions, but she did a lot of integration of the rowing with other things, and she did pretty well. I think she came like 12th, which I was surprised because I thought she was going to come like top 5. So I was surprised that a lot of the women did, like, granted, if she went 1 second faster, she came in like 8th. So there was definitely bunching. Yeah. But I think she rode like a 3:20 or something, which is, that's really fast for a female for a 1K. So the point being, if you're training effectively, then you will be building the necessary attributes to excel at something like that. But again, you could make another argument like, well, you probably do need specific preparation to be able to do that. It's like, well, yeah, she was doing power repeats for 4 to 5 weeks leading up to it. So her system was ready for 3 minutes of really hard work. So again, that would be integrating the right principles in the training process so that if that came up, she's ready to go. So, yeah, but I definitely don't do as much. That's probably something I've changed my mind on it quite a bit, is I don't do as much isolated cyclical progressions with my higher level people. It's a lot more integrated now. Because use the quarterfinal example, which you did with the row and the GHCs and the V-ups.
Yeah.
Nobody was rowing at a 140. The best were rowing at maybe like a 145. And then they were doing the sit-ups really fast and the V-ups really fast. So you had to essentially row, a little over 3,000 meters at a 145 under quite a bit of fatigue. That's very different than doing, a 3K at a 142. So that sensation, that environment is something that then has to be trained a bit more. It's not about going really, really fast, but like what's the pace you can maintain under the presence of fatigue for longer. So I didn't really think that was a rowing workout, because one of my guys.
No, it wasn't.
No,
that's why I did it right.
Yeah, well, one of my he qualified and he rode a 148-49, and that was one of his best events, because his GHCs are super fast and the V-ups are super fast. So that should tell you also, could they have designed the test better so that the rowing was more important? And I think, maybe, maybe they could have set that up a little bit differently, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, it seems like, you said you changed your mind on it, but I think that might just be a result of, like, I think that the testing body shifted. Like the single modality thing was way more common with Dave, where now, like, I think maybe the equivalent of like a sprint event is something like hat trick, where it's like it's still mixed. Like there's just not very many things that aren't going to require at least like 2 different qualities. Maybe not 2 different qualities, but like not just like a single movement, like go. And I think that's probably going to be the case too.
Mm-hmm.
Trickling down.
Yeah. I thought it was pretty cool when they did the 410 meter sprint at the games in, that's 2021, I think. Yeah, I think it was 2021. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was a good test. Like, can you sprint and not pull a hamstring and recover for the next thing you had to do? But yeah, you don't see a 5K for time or a 10K for time. There's very little isolated tests, and again, the only place they're really going to do an isolated test is at the highest level, because they have this concentrated group of people. They've already weeded out so many people. So the best way,
less outliers.
Yeah, exactly. Because the concentration will bias someone who's, so that's why, of course, too, they front load fatigue for the lifting. So it balances, at least, I'm making assumptions on how they're thinking about this, because they could be thinking about it totally differently. So I think it's always more broad, and then it gets more specific as you get into higher levels.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like if you give something like that at the games level, it's like showcasing the athletes. Whereas if you give it to a quarterfinals test, it's like, oh, the wrong people got through, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I guess the purpose of those two events are very different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important. I think they've done a good job of layering it and making it so that the right people are moving through, who are showing competency across all these different tests and these different challenges.
All right, last question for you. So semifinals are going on currently as we speak. Of your semifinal qualifiers from this year, if you think about them as a group, is there like one quality, characteristic, or like a trait that they all share?
Yeah, I would say they're not really good at one specific thing, but they're great at a lot of things. They have really good ability across many different tests, different modalities, combinations, which is I think why a lot of them did well. And not only them, but the ones who didn't qualify, a lot of them did really well at quarterfinals, because they're gaining a lot of competence across many different things. If you isolated something, or you put a lot of volume into one thing, maybe they might be a little bit more challenged there. But I definitely feel they've done a good job the past year of training, of developing great competence across many things. So I'm fairly optimistic. Most of them will do well in semis for them, because they'll be able to handle so many different variations of movements and tests and styles of it. So I think they're, the classic master of none, jack of all trades thing. I try to build them that way, because that's what the sport is. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if you can snatch 320. Like, you need to be able to run fast and cycle this barbell, and you got to recover fast, and then you have to be able to do all these gymnastics, and you got to be able to do this. So I think that might be a trait that they have. They're well prepared.
Cool. Good. Sam, people can find you on Instagram at Coach Sam Smith. OPEX Remote Coaching.
Yes, sir.
On there on Instagram at OPEX RC.
Yep.
Where else can people find you? Anything you want to say?
They can email me, sam@opexfit.com. If you have any questions or interested in coaching, you can always reach out. But thank you for having me. I always enjoy speaking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.